Hello, everyone. Welcome. And thank you so much for joining us today. I'm absolutely thrilled to join you in this space to discuss prison industrial complex abolition, the activism and organizing around it, and visions for an abolitionist future. My name is Olivia Murray, and I am a second-year law student at Harvard Law School, and I'm also a teaching fellow for the History and Literature 90 ES Prison Abolition Seminar. The Prison Abolition Seminar is a Mindich Program for Engaged Scholarship course. The Mindich Program aims to integrate community engagement with coursework and expose students to organizations and communities beyond Harvard. As such, the students in the course have engaged in volunteer projects with several of the organizations represented on today's panel. And additionally, the students in the course have designed questions for our panelists and will be helping moderate today. So I would like to extend a thank you to Thomas Dichter, the course professor, and the students of the Prison Abolition Seminar for the thoughtful insight they've offered in curating this event. And I'd also like to thank the Provostial Fund for Arts and Humanities, the Committee on Degrees on History and Literature, the Mindich Program in Engaged Scholarship, and the Mahindra Center, or the Mahindra Humanities Center, excuse me, for making this event possible. And I'd also like to give special thanks to Mary McKinnon and Daria Laguna from the Mahindra Center for Humanities for all of their hard work in helping organize this event. So on that note, I'd love to briefly introduce our wonderful panelists for today and the organizations that they work with, but then I'll let them introduce themselves in more detail. So with us today, we have Kamau Butcher, who is a fellow with the People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom. We have Leslie Credle, who is the founder and executive director of Justice for Housing. We have William Goldsby, who is the founder of Reconstruction, Inc. We have Kris Henderson, who is the executive director of Amistad Law Project. And we have Elijah Patterson, who is the communications and outreach coordinator for Black and Pink Massachusetts. So Kamau, if you would like to kick us off and have a few minutes to introduce yourself.
So thanks, Olivia. Peace, everybody. My name is Kamau Butcher. I use he, him pronouns, coming in from Brooklyn, New York. I am a brown-skinned Black man with glasses and a beard. I'm wearing a blue shirt. I work as coordinator for People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom. We are a national coalition that is working to repeal and replace the 1994 crime bill with a replacement piece of legislation that is collectively drafted via a series of people's movement assemblies that we call the People's Process. Really excited to be in this conversation with y'all. Also very excited to hopefully do a little bit of organizing today, get folks plugged into what we're working on, and definitely share more about what we have going on and learn more from everybody on the panel. So thanks so much for having me.
Wonderful, thank you, Kamau. And next, we'll have Leslie.
Good afternoon, Olivia. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. My name is Leslie Credle. I'm the Executive Director of Justice for Housing. We advocate for housing discrimination against those who have been impacted by the criminal justice system. And we also advocate for the end incarceration of women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And next we have William Goldsby. And I'd also like to flag for the audience that William is vision impaired, so we will be helping explain things to him throughout the event to make sure that he can be present with us and also be aware. So William, if you'd like to unmute yourself, and we'd love to have you introduce yourself.
Thank you. And good afternoon, family. Well, I was expecting more people to go before me so I can get a better idea of what I should be saying about me. So I am 72, was arrested twice during the Jim Crow era, and am the founder and current treasurer of Reconstruction Incorporated, which is a capacity building organization Capacity building, meaning assistant membership to access their resources, their ability, and brilliance in order to be present to govern ourselves. The last thing I will say in introducing us is we are moving forward as we speak to really address mental hygiene by demonstrating how profoundly connected the personal is political. Thank you.
Thank you so much, William. And next we will have Kris Henderson.
Hi, I'm Kris Henderson. I'm the Executive Director of Amistad Law Project. I use they, them pronouns. And Amistad Law Project is based in Philadelphia, and we do a combination of legal work and organizing aimed at getting people out of prison and getting our communities the resources that we need. Yeah, I think that's the like sort of one-line version. I'm sure we'll get into a lot more of the specifics later. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Kris. And lastly, we have Elijah Patterson.
Hi, my name is Elijah. I use they, them pronouns. I am a white non-binary person wearing clear glasses and dark red lipstick with a blue shirt. And behind me is a sign that says support the moratorium bill. Black and Pink Massachusetts is a volunteer-fueled organization working for the abolition of the criminal punishment system, and we do it specifically through supporting LGBTQ+ people, as well as people living with HIV. We were started in Boston in 2005, and we continue to grow. And I just want to shout out that a really important part of our work has always been our Pen Pal program, which pairs incarcerated members with free roam people of any identity or background in the belief that writing across walls breaks them down. And I actually came into my activism and my abolitionism by reading mail from people who were incarcerated and just like making that connection. So I find that so profound, and I'm really excited to talk more about Black and Pink and what we do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eli. And I'm so grateful to each of you for joining us today. So now we're going to move forward with the questions that we have for y'all today. And for our audience, please feel free to submit any questions via the Q&A feature, because we'll have some time reserved at the end for Q&A. So our student moderators will be coming on screen with questions that they wrote along with their volunteer working groups. So first we have Mariah Norman, who was a volunteer for the Amistad Law Project, and her and her group came up with this question for today together. So Mariah, if you want to come on, you can share with us. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Mariah Norman. I'm a first year at the college. I use she, her pronouns. And my question today is, the idea of prison abolition involves imagining new ways of responding to harm besides incarceration and punishment. How can storytelling play a role in helping us reframe our thinking and overcoming our conditioned responses? Can storytelling, whether in the form of personal narratives, works of art, or the telling of history, play a role in changing our minds when it comes to prisons? Can it help shift how we respond to harm within our families, communities, and overall society? Thank you.
And maybe Eli, if you want to start us off on that one.
Sure. So I just want to say that at Black and Pink Massachusetts, personal narratives are really important to what we do. I kind of just touched upon it, but for me, when I started reading the words of people who were incarcerated and queer, because the overlap there is really important and our folks are really underserviced. When I started hearing them tell their stories in their own words, in their own voices, the things that they thought were most important that strangers know, I really started to feel my own commitment to abolition deepen. And one of the main service opportunities that we offer is for people to come in and read and respond to mail from our members. It's a lot, though, to carry those stories within you And there's vicarious trauma that we pick up in doing it. And I always tell people when they're starting out reading letters from the inside, especially if they've never been incarcerated, don't know anyone who's been incarcerated, this is an entirely new world for them. I tell them that when I started reading mail, I used to bring a great big stack to JP Licks, which is a Boston area ice cream store, get a great big milkshake and just work my way through the stack. And that's how I dealt with the pain that I was feeling. And now we share them together. We tell the stories that are in the letters, and we really get to hear people in their own words and see people for who they are. And that's so important to us.
And anyone else can chime in now.
This is Kris. I think the short answer is definitely yes. I think the long answer is that at Amistad we've done, or not long, but a little longer. At Amistad we've done a lot of work, trying to, one, make sure that people who are directly impacted by imprisonment, generally people who have loved ones who are incarcerated, serving life without parole or death by incarceration sentences, have the training and the support they need to be able to tell their stories really powerfully and clearly to policymakers, to the public. And also, as like a part of the work that we try and do, we have a podcast called Move It Forward. The first season has like interviews with different people and is out there on all the places that you find podcasts. And some of the people that we've interviewed are people who have loved ones who are locked up, people who are telling their own stories, but also part of the purpose of the podcast and some other media work we do. We also have animated short videos that we call Practical Abolition, is like about trying to make these concepts of abolition, of what it actually means to do this work and what it is that we actually want in the world clear to people, beyond like the sort of academic, what is abolition, what isn't abolition, and trying to explain it to people in these ways. It's like, well, here is a 2-minute video that you can watch on the internet that makes it seem less daunting and more accessible.
Yeah, for us, it wasn't until directly affected men and women began speaking their truth that the light was shed on the DOC and the BOP, that their callous, brutal acts inflict on the men in prison who live inside their prisons. It wasn't until we started, people on this panel, other people started speaking their truth, that the narrative shifted. So before, when people went to prison, we always remained silent. When we came out, it was something that you wanted to hide. And, families didn't want, they know that their daughters or their sons went to prison. So definitely shifting the narrative now that society really sees prisons for what they are, and speaking our truths is the way that we shift that narrative, and the world is aware of the mental and the physical abuse that correctional officers and prison administration inflict on people. And factually, they commit crimes every day inside those prisons and not held accountable for it. So now that narrative is changing because of the world that we live in today, and for brave men and women like Eli and William and other people on this panel speaking up, basically.
Yeah, I would add maybe 1.5, like maybe 2 things to what everybody has said so far. I think a big part of storytelling for me and like why it's really important is I think similar to what Kris said, it helps us kind of shrink the issue. So it's like a little bit less abstract and you can kind of see how you can act it out in your day-to-day life. Because I think a lot of abolition boils down to like how we're going to treat each other and like how we're going to be in community with each other. And when you think of it from that perspective, that's actually something we do every day. When it's like the discernment and kind of care that we exercise in our personal relationships, whatever communities that we might be a part of, we are all practicing those all the time. Sometimes it's conscious, like sometimes it's not. And I think kind of infusing that approach and that mentality into how we kind of make decisions at a broader scale is what I think a lot of this kind of boils down to. So I think having people draw that connection for themselves, I think is like really important in understanding what actually executing these ideas like looks like in practice. The other thing I would say is around understanding and countering narratives that we both hear, what's like told about us, and then what ends up sinking in and like what we kind of internalize, you know, about ourselves and about each other. And that's like it's really powerful, it's really potent, it's obviously really intentional. When you think about like different media narratives told around policing, like all the like, you know, propaganda scripted like series and movies that are about policing, the police are the protagonists, right? Like the stories about them, anytime they're challenged or there's a commentary about something that's going on in the world, it's about how that individual person is processing that thing rather than the implications of their existence within the structure that they operate in. And so I think a big part of narratives as well that a lot of folks have already mentioned is like when we're telling stories, we're not centering the systems, like we're not centering our opponents, right? Like we're centering ourselves and we're lifting up what we do and what we want and what we care about, and pushing back against these narratives that can grow and kind of get out of control if we let them.
Yeah, I'm addicted to listening. I would much rather hear everyone's voice and narratives and stories. In that question, I'm going to hang on to just one word, harm. And Reconstruction was designed to assist second time of men who were convicted of at least 2 violent offenses. And of course, a few of the men have been convicted of murder, 3rd degree, and were working in their last 12 to 18 months before release. And the challenge that I made to the organizations around, like the American Friends Service Committee, the Quaker groups, other faith-based groups, is I wanted to address the rage of Black men. Because none of us are born to be rageful. It's circumstances which somewhat get to chiseling away at the them and us and focus more on the human. That's how we started. And it was second-time violent offender because I was incarcerated for 2 violent offenses, both time fighting the police. And my last comment around, I never used rage in the curriculum throughout the 14 to 18 months. We looked at their background, who they were as people, what was their makeup and the circumstances that brought them to commit those offenses. Their relationship within their family and the resources that was not available. And now as I look back and listen to our focus, harm is the least of what I believe we should be organizing around. there is just too much brilliance within each individual to have such a narrow focus on harm. And I believe it's almost like religious authority have us believing in this thing they call Satan, Satan. If you believe in something like that and give it power, therefore it's going to control you. But there's a lot more to our existence than being harmed. Thank you.
Thank you, William, and thank you everyone else for those answers. Next, we have Josie. Josie was a volunteer with Black and Pink Massachusetts this semester, and her working group crafted our next question.
Oh, sorry. Hi, everyone. Thank you for speaking today. Our question from the group is we often talk about the difference between reforming prisons, which can maintain or even strengthen the institution of incarceration, and abolishing prisons altogether. But the line between reform and abolition isn't always so clear. How do you grapple with the tensions and connections between prison reform and prison abolition? Is reform a means to abolition, or is one more important than the other? And is there room in the abolitionist movement for various interpretations of abolition? Thank you.
How about Kris? Would you like to start us off on that one?
Sure. I think it's really important that that we use language intentionally and have, you know, not like 100% shared understanding or like shared like definitions of things, but I do think that there are things that are and are not abolition. And I think that, you know, there's different ways of being an abolitionist and, you know, different campaigns, different fights that each of us might take on. But I think there are also some things that definitely are not abolition. I think it's important to not say that they are. I think that reform is not a means to abolition, but that it is sometimes necessary and important. We are an explicitly abolitionist organization, but I think that, you know, it's likely that some of the work that we're doing, people would be like, oh, that's not abolitionist. But like some of the work that we do, especially around trying to make sure conditions in Pennsylvania prisons are better for the people who are incarcerated in them, is important to us, not because we think that's going to result in people getting out of prison, but because people that we know and love are locked up right now. And until we can get folks out, you know, we want people to be living in somewhat better conditions. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that we don't want to do, you know, reform work all day long. Like it is not the thing that really drives us and inspires us. But we often look at it as sort of harm reduction work, and therefore necessary.
Yeah, I want to just add on to that. Thanks, Kris. In everything that we do at Black and Pink, we're trying to get to abolition, but sometimes we see the possibilities within a reform. And I regard our legislative work as a way of reducing the harm that the system inflicts on people. But I also believe that legislation cannot or will not save us. Legislation is what has put our people behind bars, has put our people behind razor wire. That's how they got their legislation. But right now in Massachusetts, Black and Pink Massachusetts has a bill called the Rights Act to improve conditions for queer, trans, and people living with HIV. And it would be a real step forward for the conditions that people are forced to live And at the same time, we're thinking of like all those beautiful critical resistance graphics that like really help you think through, okay, does this build up the number of people getting paid by the system? Does it put more resources into the system? Does it create work that we have to untangle later? And we just try to be mindful in everything that we do. Are we building barriers that later we're going to want to take down?
Absolutely. We are abolitionists. Reform does not get us anywhere. That's why we are in the position that we are in right now. The environment and atmosphere inside prisons is toxic. It is not any reforms, any type of new policies, procedures you put in place is not going to change the environment of the correctional officers, the mindset of the administration. You can't reform racism. You can't reform ignorance. Their way of thinking, people inside their prisons are subhuman and do not deserve respect. So there is no room for reform, absolutely, in inside our world at all. We look upon all systems, right? Department of Social Services, Department of Family Services, DYS, all the systemic oppression and marginalizations in Black and Brown communities stem from actually the prison industrial complex. It really shapes our community. We're targeted in our community. So absolutely, reform is not a word that we use in our movement. Corrections and I'd say years ago, the system was never a good place. But all the reforms and legislation that they have enacted and added on, solitary bills, the new way that they can lock you down 22 hours a day, all of these new reforms have caused so much trauma and harm for families, separation of mothers from children. There's just nothing good about reform in any type of legislation that can change the system today.
Yeah, I agree with like a lot of what's been shared, especially with Leslie. I dropped into the chat for folks to see, and I'll just like talk through a little bit of it because it's been really helpful for me as kind of a guiding document, and just want to give a huge shout out to Critical Resistance for all the work that they do, and especially in putting this resource together. So, and looking at kind of like reformist reforms compared to like abolitionist steps, like things that get us closer to what our end goal is. So when you're thinking about policing, the questions that you want to be asking are like, does it reduce funding to the police? Does it challenge the notion that the police increase safety? Like this is a big one, right? Like challenging the legitimacy of the systems and the structures. Or does it enforce those things or try to legitimize those systems and structures? Does it reduce the tools, the tactics, and the technology that's available to the structure, right? And does it reduce scale? And you can follow kind of similar lines around talking through things around prisons. Does it reduce the number of people that are in prison? Does it reduce the reach of jails? Does it reduce the reach of surveillance in different forms? And a lot of times, the reason that a lot of folks on this call, I think, are rejecting reforms is because the answer to a lot of those questions tends to be no, right? Like what ends up happening is you're pouring more resources into these systems, which makes them bigger, makes them stronger, and from like a cultural standpoint, makes them more legitimate, kind of doubles down on their legitimacy. The folks that I work with and just like different campaigns that I've been a part of, like when we're thinking through like the mechanics of a reform and like how it goes, it's kind of like, all right, what rule is changing? Who's supposed to follow the rule? Who's supposed to enforce the rule? And what happens when the rule is broken? And all of the answer to like all of those questions tends to be like putting more resources into the thing that's broken, right? Or functioning as it's designed, depending on your perspective. So most of the time what you're doing is like building in more bureaucracy, building in more red tape, like task forcing it up and like adding more and more resources to these structures. When instead what we should be doing is building towards like dismantling them and taking steps towards like taking things away from it rather than pouring things into it, hoping that it'll function better. Because they're functioning as they were designed. I think part of this too is like, sometimes I think people are trying to reform something by giving it a different function. Like we're trying to reform police by giving them a different job than what they signed up to do, what they think they're supposed to be doing, what they want to be doing, and what they've been instructed to do, right, by their supervisors and the superiors. And the same is true in prisons and jails. And so a lot of that for me goes back to legitimacy and resources, like how are we undermining those things? And oftentimes in my experience, aiming at reform doesn't actually get at the root causes of a lot of these things and instead makes them bigger.
I see the two, abolition and reform, having a relationship that goes hand in hand. Especially when you look at it from the vantage point of human movement. We came a long way. Fight for Life is one of 5 of Reconstruction domains. We have Reconstruction 2 that does research, LEAD that works with young people, AEA that deals and work with returning citizens, and Nova Pillar is an incubator for new ideas. Fight for Lifers started in 1993, by about 20-something family members of lifers and 2 other people, another sister and myself. And the mission of Fight for Lifers was to abolish the life sentence without the possibility of parole. To abolish. And many of the groups with whom we coalesce from 93 to now has inserted the word reform, changing policies. One of the objectives in abolishing the life sentence when we started off was to get family members to be prepared to make a sacrifice. Would you give up that visitation? Will you give up that phone call? In other words, will you give up feeding the industry complex, the vultures that make money off our loved ones? And the only way you can starve them is sacrifice that visit. Here in America, we are not prepared to make that sacrifice. So abolition could be in your face direct like that, or a slow pace. Fight for Lifers started off looking at the elders who serving a life sentence without parole, women who deals with a particularly different issue as lifers. We decided to focus on children who were sentenced. We felt that that would pull the hearts of Americans. And as a result of that, in 2012, the US Supreme Court decided that it was unconstitutional to sentence a child. reform starts in the mind. And many of us, through religious authority, indict, shame. We indict people who don't think or believe the way we believe. Hence, we police ourselves just like the police force does.
Thank you so much, William, and thank you, everyone, for those answers. So next we have Iris, who helped volunteer with Justice for Housing this semester, and along with the rest of the volunteer working group, came up with our next question. So Iris.
Hi, thank you guys so much for being here. So here's what our group came up with. The mission statement for Justice for Housing declares that its intention is to end incarceration for women and girls, but the organization also works with incarcerated people of all gender identities. My question is for Leslie to start with, but for everyone to answer. How do each of you balance different identities within the population your organization intends to serve? How do you ensure that you're supporting diverse groups of people with differing needs?
Thank you, Iris. Justice for Housing was founded not just to provide housing for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. I founded the organization as a tool. We use housing as a tool to prevent incarceration and recidivism. We did a listening tour. We surveyed 100 formerly incarcerated women and transgender women, and we asked them what was their number one barrier upon release of incarceration and what was their number one contributor to incarceration. Housing and employment were the number 1 and 2 answers. Housing is the key to ending incarceration, no matter what diverse group you identify with. Of course, some groups have a harder time securing housing than others. For example, Blacks may have a harder time trying to be housed in a predominantly white neighborhood, or poor people seeking housing in a predominantly affluent neighborhood. LGBTQ or transgender, they face callous discrimination. So to answer your question, how do we balance the different identities and ensure that we are supporting diverse groups with different needs? This is where we call on our allies, our community partner organizations like Black and Pink or Mass Transgender Political Coalition, who have the expertise in gender identities, other organizations who lack expertise where we don't focus on. So we work with incarcerated and formerly incarcerated individuals to ensure that our constituents receive holistic and wraparound services, no matter what group they identify with. Preliminarily, the rate of recidivism in Massachusetts is a whopping 36%. A third of people who are released will return to prison. We go into the prisons before their release. We stumbled on to, even before we were founded, I did, for a friend, I applied for housing for her 5-6 years before her application was, before she was ready to be released. As soon as she hit the halfway house, she received housing. So we find unique and innovative ways to ensure that we are able to cater to all of our constituents' needs. That's how we provide services for different needs of individuals, using the resources in the community, partnerships, and collaboration.
Go ahead, William.
Go ahead, somebody else go.
Okay, I'll go then you. So definitely as an organization that serves a particular population of queer, transgender people, people who are intersex, two-spirit, living with HIV, we think about this a lot. How can we be sure that we're giving our services to the particular population that we've identified that needs particular services? And how do we do that without playing gatekeeper or saying like, oh, this person's queerer than this person's really trans, that person's not because they don't pass. So we're constantly thinking about our membership, who our members really are, who we think our members are, and ways to connect with people in the broader community. Our org has really always suffered from being disproportionately white, non-incarcerated, and college educated, because we get a lot of people from, in the Boston area, there's a ton of colleges. So we get a lot of volunteers that way, but it means then that people who are reading and responding to mail may not share the background that the people who are writing us do. So one of the ways that we work on this is we only hire formerly incarcerated folks who are queer. And every Monday we look over all of our mutual aid requests as a team. We talk them over and we decide what we can do with our limited finances and who we are able to work with, who are most in need and who we can provide the most help for. So we're always assessing. I think weekly when we do this, we're assessing, okay, how do we make sure the aid is getting to people that we're saying we're giving it to? And it's definitely tricky. I'm all set.
Oh my bad. William, you go. That's right, you're gonna go next.
You yielding?
Yes.
Yeah, I am very comfortable invoking spirituality in this work. And I say that in terms of that question, I make three comments. One is 2 months before our first person came home in '95, we had no idea where he was going to sleep. And an elder woman, 85, then half my size, stepped up and gave us a three-story building, a three-story apartment building. She went through the Quakers and she went through a Catholic group that didn't want it because of where it was. The organization gave that property to me because I've been working for 6 or 7 years without pay. Now it's an investment property. And the left, those of us who call ourselves left, organizers or activists, oftentimes we're not emotionally intimate enough with each other to hold each other on their own shit. And the apartment building is 3 floors, 6 units, and it takes a lot of social surgery to not fall victim of the system. If you don't pay rent, you get out. Or to become the police. So we have a system whereby we have subgroups with individuals that's having issues. And so it requires patience. The other thing I wanted to say is, as men come home and women, most of the men and some of the groups with which we work are queer groups. It's like pushing an elephant up a greasy pole to have a lot of men to sit in community organizing group of people with different sexual identities. And that requires us to get emotionally intimate again, to begin to educate on some basic levels. And so it's more than a notion. The last thing I'd like to say in terms of identity I mean, 72, I'm blind, I'm gay, HIV, had COVID, live in the hood. None of that stuff is in the way of me being a whole person. I think it's important to create spaces where those of us with different vantage point, skill set, abilities, voices are amplified. But at the same time, we have to also make space to recognize the humanity, the spiritual connection that we have. And the identity oftentimes becomes a distraction from the human that's in the organization.
I was just gonna say that we were really founded and really like follow and believe in Black feminism. And part of that to us is the belief that when the people who are most oppressed are free, are liberated, then the rest of us necessarily will be. And so we both sort of hold that and also recognize that like just on like a numbers, like just based on numbers, most of the people in Pennsylvania prisons are people who were assigned male at birth, people who are currently in prisons designated for men. And also that the vast majority of people who are supporting those people, regardless of what kind of like the sex of the prison that they're in, most of the people who are supporting them are women. And so, you know, we sort of hold that many of the people that we work with who are incarcerated are men, but the vast majority of the people that we're working with outside are women.
So at PCSF, the coalition that I work for, we do what we can to also adopt a Black queer feminist analysis, echoing a lot of what folks, I mean, have said already in terms of understanding that the people that are the most marginalized tend to be the people that are left behind. And when you are intentional about not only moving way past kind of like tokenizing or even like merely empowering or centering folks, and actually are more intentional about developing like leadership and following the lead of the folks that are most marginalized, you land on the solutions that are the most beneficial to all. And you're kind of like actively undermining these norms that we tend to have, I think, in movement spaces that definitely center, I think, cisgendered men. And so undermining that at every turn is a goal of our coalition and something that we try to practice in our day-to-day as well.
Thank you all. Before we kick off our last question from our students, I just want to remind everyone, if you have a question and want to put it in the Q&A, we may be able to use that going forward to our next section. So, but our next question is from Mickey Glavin, who worked with Law for Black Lives, along with her working group, and Law for Black Lives works closely with the People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom on people's movement assemblies. So Mickey, if you'd like to share.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michaela, and my question is, in class, we've discussed how prison abolition is about changing more than just the carceral state, and how abolitionism seeks to transform the larger social and cultural structure of our society. Can you please talk about what abolition means to you, both in the present, in the work you're doing now, and in the future? What does an abolitionist future look like? What other institutions or systems of harm would need to be confronted besides the prison in order to achieve this future? Thank you.
And William, would you maybe like to start us off on that one?
Oh, dear. I appreciate it. The question, all of the questions are quite causal, and causal from my vantage point mean a lack of access to not just dollars and cent type of capital, but spiritual, social, political, environmental capital. The lack of that. And we have been, as a people, conditioned for the past 3,000 years. And so to that end, the way that we think is the causal system. We perpetuate it in our words, in our breathing. And so the way I would answer it in short, y'all, is we are all, I would take the position that we all should be resisting how we are conditioned to think. Oh, we don't want to get old. We don't want bags under our eyes. We got to be nice. Where did that come from? We just need to rethink how we have been conditioned to think, and the way that we think perpetuates the system we are organized to resist. And so it starts with you and I, me first, and rethinking and resisting everything that I've been told. The past is only here to help us do what we're going to do for the future. It's nothing, it should not be a casket that we sleep in. And our organic intelligence is smothered by how we think. So in closing, my response to that question is we have to abolish how we think and rethink a new justice paradigm and our role in it. We have to resist what religious authority, educational, industrial complex, healthcare, industrial complex have conditioned us. And so it starts with the individual, because every word we use, we perpetuate the system we are organized to think. So being organizers and activists, we should be, I am the first that I need to examine in order to abolish it. And I believe we're doing it just by this conference.
Yeah, as I think about my personal definition of abolition, at its core, it's about addressing harm without replicating harm for me. And I've started to say that abolition is both the goal and the path that we take to get there. So many of us are moving toward that goal of abolition by abolishing police, prisons, carceral systems. But the way that we get to that goal is by practicing abolition now in our day-to-day lives and building it out. So things like housing first solutions for unhoused people, medical, mental, substance treatment on demand. In Massachusetts, passing this bill up behind me, a 5-year moratorium on building new prisons and jails that would stop a brand new prison for women and people identified by the state as women. I think that there's a lot of ways that we can integrate within ourselves. I'll say personally, I'm autistic, and the rules have always been very important to me and how I move through the world. And so I'm constantly confronting the cop in my head. And I think we all have that voice to one degree or another, telling us the dominant narrative about the things that we're seeing or hearing. And it takes a lot of intervention to learn how to quiet it and how to respond to that voice in your head in a way that says like, no, we're not going to do the cop thing. We're going to use different responses. So like for me, as I think about moving towards the future, I'm thinking what individual things do we all have to work on within ourselves in order to be prepared to care for one another the way that abolition calls us to.
For me, it's dismantling systems of power, Department of Social Services, foster care, criminal justice system, DYS system. All these systems have been strategically built, and the policies that in place are strategically made to oppress and create barriers. For example, if someone receives a social services or some type of assistance, the policies in place, they can only work 20 hours a week, or they make it so hard for somebody to obtain services that it dissuades them from even trying to get help, to get assistance, or the bureaucratic loops and hoops they make you jump through just to receive something, public housing, for example. Their punitive policies that have been in place since they enacted the 1990 crime bill. Not only did they enact racist drug policies, they enacted punitive housing policies where for a mother who is struggling, and if one of her family members is arrested, they make mothers choose between their housing voucher or their child, right? And so these type of policies that separate families, keep people poor. You can only make a certain amount of money, or you're going to lose your food stamps. Things like that are why do you have these policies and rules? You make people not be able to get ahead in life. If you make over a certain amount of money, you can't receive this assistance and that assistance, but yet you can't get a job to pay you enough to sustain a household. So it leaves people stuck. And they're strategically made that way to oppress a whole community. So for me, abolition looks like dismantling these systems of power that have been built just to target individuals who they criminalize poverty, criminalize housing, criminalize substance abuse. All of these things that are in place have to be the people, right? The people have to organize and collaborate to get some type of change in policy and legislation. So for me, it looks like putting different people in power, having the stakeholders run for office, and change these systems that have been centuries harmed communities.
I think to me, a lot of what abolition means in my life right now, and a lot of the ways in which I practice being an abolitionist are about parenting. And, there's like a lot of things that children do where you want to punish them, you want to make them do the thing that they're supposed to do, that you want them to do, oftentimes the thing that is better for them. And so much of it to me is like resisting, trying to control them, resisting, trying to punish them, trying to give them the tools they need to be able to regulate themselves, understand consequences of their actions, of their choices, and also like how to be decent humans. Which is, you can like say it, but it is very difficult when there's a 12-year-old in your face telling you all the reasons that they aren't going to listen to you. But like, I think that to me, it's just like a relationship that like there is inherently some like hierarchy. There is like a difference in power that adults have with children. And so like part of it is like resisting that and like trying to make space for the unique gifts that they have. And then like I feel like that trickles out into all of my other relationships. And in, when I am in conflict with someone, my initial reaction is, hopefully then not going to be one where I'm trying to punish that person, where I'm trying to cut that person off, but where I am trying to, show up as my best self and someone who can listen and try and build bridges. And then I think as far as like my political work, my day job, a lot of it is around trying to make sure people have what they need, both to prevent harm and then also when harm occurs. So much of our current criminal legal system is about, obviously is about punishment, and also about using people who've been harmed as like the spokespeople for being as harsh as possible, and not actually about making sure those people get access to things that might help them heal, or frameworks or something, anything other than punishment for punishment's sake. And so that's also something that we push for a lot. And we specifically do a lot of work with people who we call dual victims, people who've lost loved ones to homicide and also to imprisonment, generally speaking, death by incarceration. Because, the reality is that is most of the people who are victims, people who've been harmed, especially by things like homicide in places like Philly. It's people who have, both have 3 cousins who are locked up and their best friend was murdered. And so, yeah, that's all I was gonna say. Thank you.
Yeah, I think for me, when I think about abolition, I think about like abundance for our folks, like everybody being able to kind of do and learn like what they want without having to navigate, as folks have talked through today, right? So many different like traps laid for them along the way, depending on different aspects of your identities or where you live, or combinations of those things. In terms of like other like institutions or systems of harm that I think also stand in the way of that, a couple of things come to mind for me. One is, I think, our culture of surveillance, both like in a literal sense when it comes to like the presence of police as a form of surveillance, right? Where even if you're not necessarily having an interaction with a police officer, like their existence like in your space and in your life is a form of surveillance, especially over the last, decade or so with the increased use of like body cameras, for example, and what they do, I think, to kind of steadily just watch certain people in certain populations all the time. I think that's really kind of clearly standing in the way of us living lives the lives that we deserve and the lives that we need. The other thing that comes to mind is capitalism, frankly. I think like abolition and capitalism can't mix together. It's something that we need to address when we look at like the history of this country, the history of the prison itself. It's always been like an economic source and huge factor. You look at like, you know, the use of chain gangs to literally build out Southern infrastructure. You look at the prison as a constant site of like free and disempowered labor since its origin, even like to this day. I'm thinking about, you know, people that are incarcerated in California being forced to fight fires, you know what I mean, while they're incarcerated, and like what that even conceptually means for a country and a system that's even like allowed to happen for us. So yeah, and also just like the role that capitalism played in kind of setting the stage for criminalization, whether it's like, you know, organized abandonment in cities as they grew more and more diverse, and how that set the stage for kind of increases in crime as people were dealing with extreme poverty being caused by policy decisions, right? So those things feel deeply intertwined with the conversation that we're having today. So I just wanted to like lift those up as things that we're at least thinking about and taking into consideration as we, you know, engage in our work.
Wonderful. So thank you so much to our student moderators who very thoughtfully and artfully crafted those questions. And now we're going to move into the question and answer portion of the event. Leslie, I know that you have to leave us a few minutes early, but if you want to, in a few words, answer the first question from the Q&A, it is from Claire DeRoche.
I'd like to answer Bailey's question before I go, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
Would you like to read it aloud, or should I?
You can read it.
Oh, okay. So being someone who is a part of the majority in our country and who hasn't been incarcerated, what are ways you think individuals like me could use our privilege to support abolishing prisons, and educate ourselves on the experiences incarcerated individuals are faced with?
Yeah, thank you, Bailey, for asking that question. And it is so needed. Privileged people can insert themselves in places that we cannot go, places that we are not accepted. And so inserting yourself in the work and rooms that we are shut out of. Our People Not Prisons Coalition, we are a lot of privileged members, and they take on the work. Eli and I are in the same group on the work that where we would not get anywhere, you could. And so inserting yourself, joining a coalition, a movement, and taking on the roles of those assignments that someone like myself could not get achieved, you could. So that is one of the ways that you could help or get involved. And I want to thank everybody for having me tonight. I'm sorry I have another commitment I have to go off to, but it was a pleasure. And I threw some petitions in the chat if anybody wants to sign some of the legislation that we filed this year. Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you so much, Leslie. It was a pleasure to have you. Does anyone else want to touch on that same question, or we can move on to another question in the Q&A?
Olivia, I would please.
Yes.
Again, rethinking what we've been taught to think. Going on a cotton field and all of the labels I mentioned earlier, I just don't see, I do not agree that people who have dollars or a different color skin than I am, European, to be any more privileged than I am. It just ain't happening. I never wanted to assimilate and have not yet assimilated. That assimilation is surrounded by thinking that those with whom we assimilated are more privileged than us. And I hope y'all can hang in there with this little caveat. I think that's what it is. Mahalia Jackson was one of the most, well-known gospel singer. She sung when Dr. King did that famous speech in DC. And I think she's from the small place in either Louisiana or Mississippi. And she sung her gospel music in a ragtag church. She had been known by other larger churches. So she was invited to audition in a Black church that was trying to assimilate with the establishment. And they had the audacity to tell Sister Mahalia Jackson, baby, if you want to go ahead in your life, you got to stop moving them hips. And she stopped. For a spiritualist as Mahalia Jackson, I don't think anyone can touch her, nor myself, in terms of being privileged. And that's what I mean when I'm saying rethink what we've been taught. And for you who think you privileged, let's talk about what privilege is. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Anyone else want to share on that point?
I think the only little thing I would add is that, wow, his name just, why is his name escaping me? The founder of EJI talked a lot about proximity. And I think like the idea that as we develop relationships with people, as we are proximate to these issues that we're working on, like both the more possibilities open up, and also like our relationship to the work changes. And so I think that, like people have certain identities that give them more privilege than others. But it's always possible to develop relationships with people that are bridging these gaps and putting you in a different perspective. So that's all I would say.
Thank you, Kris. Anybody else? Okay, so moving forward with the question from Claire DeRoche. So what sustains you in this effort to abolish prisons? It's such a long-term effort, so how do you stay hopeful?
I'll say the work itself can be hard as hell, but it also gives me so much joy. Like we bailed a trans woman out who had been in jail for 2 weeks. She came out with her press on purple fingernails still all on, and I was like, yes. Like there are small moments of resistance that we have to find and we have to learn how to love them. My pen pal has been bounced around the federal system and was very scared about a new transfer. He landed in a place that's so gay that they aren't allowed to sew because everyone is making skinny leg uniforms. And as a gay man, that means so much to him. So finding the little things, like, you know, as I mentioned, for me, it used to be ice cream was how I got through it. Finding community, finding ways that our people inside are experiencing joy because they're loving one another, they're creating communities. And it's important to see where we're all working together on this project and, you know, being here in this virtual room with all of you, all of us thinking about, you know, shared goals and how do we move forward. There's a lot of joy in that for me.
Thank you for sharing that, Eli. I really appreciate that. I agree. I think celebrating your wins is vital. You have to take the time to, when something good happens, like acknowledge it, acknowledge how much of your own work went into it. And I think also acknowledge that all of the work that we're doing is building on the work of other people that aren't here for different reasons, you know. And I think seeing yourself, I'll keep it personal. I think seeing myself within that kind of lineage is really helpful. It kind of relieves me from a little bit of the pressure of thinking that these are all things that we have to have figured out right now, or like we have to get all the wins now. Obviously, we're trying to, you know, stop bad things from happening and like protect our folks and all these things. So it's not that we don't care about the present, but I think it's important to understand that you fit within like a movement, you fit within the lineage that it's your responsibility to contribute to. But we're not the last ones, you know what I mean? Our job is to like push it forward as much as we can, find joy where we can, celebrate the wins where we can, enjoy full lives and then pass it on. You know what I mean? I think having that approach has been really useful and beneficial for me.
I think that the work itself is worthwhile, even without any idea of how long it's going to take to win. There are these really beautiful moments, like in Pennsylvania, we had the most juvenile lifers of any state, which also means that the most juvenile lifers came home than like in any other state. And so now there are people who are out here fighting with us who spent, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50 years in prison since they were under 18, which, you know, was like a really beautiful, invigorating thing for the movement. And so, yeah, it's also like, what is the alternative to not do it and still recognize how terrible things are and just kind of sit with that? Like, that doesn't sound good.
I didn't ask to do this stuff. I don't remember making a decision to be here doing this stuff. I came to Philadelphia from Latin America serving in the Peace Corps and came here intrigued with the audacity of the government killing 11 people in a groove bomb. And as a result of that, Reconstruction surfaced. And I have been chosen by fate to do this. I don't know what it is without hope. I just don't know what that is. I have no other choice than to have hope. It's just embracing the wholeness of humanity, as beautiful as it is, to do that allow us to heal those that's been lacerated, raped, incarcerated, murdered by the state. It's impossible to heal those wounds if we don't embrace our whole selves. I'm scared not to have hope. And I think even, well, not think, just the words that I'm hearing today, I can't afford to say I disagree or agree. I understand everything, and everything that everybody said is so hopeful. It just leave me with a lot more questions for each one of you.
You all. And for our last question today, what are the most pressing next steps towards, PIC abolition in your view? What next steps are important for your local communities, but what next steps are also important on a national scale?
I think a thing I was sort of alluding to earlier is like important to say explicitly in this moment, which is that like prison industrial complex abolition means that even the bad people shouldn't be in prison. And so, there are these moments when I don't think there's anything, like I personally don't think there's anything like wrong with an individual being like, I want this person to suffer. I want this person to be punished. But I think it's wrong to have that as like a policy. I think it's wrong for the state to do that. And so even in these moments when cops, when individual racists or whatever are doing these really awful things, as abolitionists, we shouldn't be like, yes, that person should be locked up, that person should be charged, that person should serve a really, really long sentence, because that's not actually the thing that's going to get us to the world that we want to live in. And so, yeah, even the bad people, no prison. If you believe that there are bad people, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, it's like you can't make law or base your worldview on the Charles Mansons of the world. It's just not a practical way to go about things when most of us are here in community trying to grow together, trying to work towards our goals and our dreams, and they may look very different. But it doesn't make sense to me to legislate based on the worst possible outcome or contingency. Instead, I think that we need to be, well, they asked about Boston in the question, so I'm going to say again, we need to pass the moratorium. We can stop a brand new $50 million women's prison to incarcerate 200 people. And that is unbelievable. That's money that should be going into the community. So in Massachusetts, we're really fighting that fight right now. And on a national scale, starting conversations. The way that defund blew up last summer was really incredible and something I didn't think I would see. And of course it's tapered off, but people have heard the words now. They've heard abolition. They may not know the right definition, but they've heard of it in context. So we're building it together. And I think that just grabbing more people and bringing them along is so much more.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been shared, and I really appreciate it. I think something that feels pressing in our work, my work is like national in scale, so that tends to be my lens on things, and we work with like local like base building orgs as well. So a big issue I think is kind of standing firm on our policy demands in the face of the backlash, right? Like what Eli was saying around the kind of life cycle that the defund narrative and demand has had over the last 18 months, where people were saying it kind of like with their chest at first, and then there was this kind of huge backlash from the right from, you know, the right that thinks it's the center, from the center that thinks it's the left. And we've been in a position where we're in a responsive posture now, trying to figure out like if we're gonna like stand firm with that demand based on the kind of like feedback, even if it means that you might lose some people in doing that, or if there's like more of a kind of like conciliatory or compromising position where you kind of like walk it back a little bit so as not to offend people for whom this is like a new concept and it offends their sensibilities, right? So I think like, how do we develop messaging and demands that are clear, make sure we're on the same page like amongst each other? How do we support each other in developing those things and building them out? And then how do we kind of discern between folks that are like movable, you know what I mean, that we can bring into this tent and move along, and folks that are not and are kind of there, that have kind of solidified themselves as opponents, right? And how do we kind of respond accordingly to those shifts? I think is like a really big priority for us moving forward.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. We have two things going on. Well, Michelle Alexander in her New Jim Crow talks about the caste system. And throughout the world, there are caste systems. When Europe colonized Africa the first time is when the caste system was installed. Again, colonized again when they brought us over here. And that caste system in this country means some of us is born into a particular circumstance whereby they're going to be. So the two initiatives right now, one is creating the funds. But first, I have three nephews that I just brought up from the South who just was in their head against brick walls to move forward. Never had a license, owed $25,000 to $5,000 on the license, which in many places, if you have a fine on your license, you ain't gonna get a job, not even at McDonald's. And because of some of our sexual freedom, you're in court, you can't afford the court costs. And so one project is to create enough fund to relieve that capital prison, that capital incarceration. We have identified about 4 people who we will be taken into that power. And that is a reciprocity component to it, where they will be given the skills and the directives to speak with the decision makers within the traffic court and custody court. And as I mentioned in the offset, the second one is creating a healing circle by which we can address the mental hygiene of a cohort of people, so that we can really see how important it is as whole people, that the political is personal and the personal is political. What is unique about this is we want to bring in alternative therapeutic processes that insurances normally will not pay for, like somatics therapy, family structure therapy, homeopathic therapy, dancing, tai chi. So those are the two things that we're working on at this moment. Thank you.
Well, wow, what amazing insights. And it's been such an honor to be in this space with each of you. Eli, Kris, William, Kamau, thank you so much for being here with us today. Each of you, your organizations, your work, give me so much hope and motivate me to continue building and imagining and growing. So thank you to our audience for joining us. And again, thank you to everyone who made this event possible. If you'd like to rewatch or share this webinar, it will be posted by the Mahindra Center for Humanities on YouTube within a week or so. So thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.